Okay, the case of the bank auditor. I sent out some of my thoughts, but I would love to hear from the rest of you. Thoughts, reflections, reactions.
We aren't discussing the UTA today?
Yeah, it's the
Oh,
article called The Unconscious Therapeutic Alliance, but the case
okay.
itself, the patient is referred to as the bank
Oh,
auditor.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. There it is. Sorry.
No problem. Who wants to begin? Agreements, disagreements, concerns.
Well, I'll start. Um, I thought that this was a very old-fashioned, typical psychoanalytic case. I learned this about both sibling rivalry and incest and the Oedipal complex in Psych 101. And uh, I I also let's see what do I have here. Of course, it was exacerbated by for foster children, but even so, the things like the earliest memory, all that was, Davanloo's basic interest. He knew Freud so well,
Mm,
and he just, included it. Now, I've always thought in the 38 years that I was in psychoanalytic theory and practicing that way that the UTA, I never named it the UTA, but it was obvious. It
mhm,
was after you work a while with somebody and you've made progress, suddenly they start to do what Davanloo calls the UTA. So when I first heard about it in ISTDP, I said, why is he calling it that? It's obvious. It happens. It always happens if you work with long enough. And
mm,
so I was but on the other hand, when I would read psychoanalytic literature, I was only really interested in the metapsychology. I really did not like the vignettes.
mm,
But with Davenloo, I can't wait to read the vignettes.
mm,
So
mm.
anyway, those are my
Yeah,
thoughts.
thank you so much. That's a great way to start us off. Anybody else, either in response to what Anne is saying or some of your own thoughts, some of your own reactions? And it's good to see you, Ruth. Nice to see you.
I'll say something. Maybe it's in a continuation. I mean, that's what got me thinking while Ian was talking. Is I think that what caught me at the end of the article is how after all the work on the resistance and exploring the mixed feelings and the complex feelings versus all those these the dynamics in the family, what what was really great for me is the ability of the patient to express positive feelings towards the therapist at the end of the therapy and being open about that, or open about the good feelings he has about being close to someone else and express the closeness. And for me, it really pointed out how at the root of all those barriers that we try to go through is the longing and the positive feelings that
Hmm.
are buried underneath and are also avoided.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was for me, it was really beautiful to like
Hmm.
to cement that.
Hmm. And the positive feelings are partly a result of the therapist's persistence and doggedness and real really conveying the message. I want to get through to you. I want to know you underneath these defenses. I mean, I think that's partly what generates so much positive feelings, in addition to the positive feelings also being there, I think.
Just saying another thing, I'm thinking about the importance of that in um, getting the patient connected to the motivation of having close relationships, even outside. I mean, in his life with his wife, with his son, after having that,
Mhm.
uncovered
Yeah,
in the therapy.
yeah.
I
I
thought that the take-home sentence or paragraph is on page 88 in the bottom of the second paragraph, where he says, uh, uh, "This reveals that the repeated challenge to the resistance has all the time been steadily mobilizing, and the unconscious therapeutic alliance beneath the surface." So I thought he was trying to make the point of you have to constantly challenge the resistances, and that's what brings forward these kinds of thoughts or
think
feelings.
that is probably what he's saying. I think so. Hmm. Yeah, you're apropos what you were saying. I was reminded, I had this patient once towards the end of a therapy session. She realized how conflicted she was about the therapy simply because it was so helpful, simply because she was realizing that I was the only person in her life that she could be this open with. And so coming to therapy was this really painful reminder of how little of that she had in her life. Like,
Mhm.
wow, I can be this open with you and you're supportive and accepting. I can't do that with my partner. I can't do that with my mom or my dad. And so it was important for the treatment for her to realize that this was becoming a source of conflict for her, mixed feelings for her. Anyway, enough of me rambling. Who wants to share?
So
Question.
I'd like to chime in. Hi everybody. So I had underlined on page 86, like the patient says, you have succeeded in pulling it out. He also says, where is it? Um, or things that make me
Yeah.
angry, and you make me talk about them.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've had clients say almost similar things to me when I've used a more vertical approach, and they appreciate it.
Mhm.
But then I'm always asking myself, like, but is their will on board? Like, are they driving the therapy? So like I find that I question myself with that approach.
Mhm.
Because sometimes it goes sideways, and they're not happy with me, and they don't give me that feedback. So so
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's a great comment, great observations. And I don't know anybody who has never had a patient or a course of treatment go sideways. I mean, I happen to know that Davanloo had courses of treatment that went sideways. I don't think he published those cases. But that is really important to acknowledge that, what gets published or shown in workshops are cases where it went well. It doesn't always go well. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I do have some more reflections about what you said there, but I don't want to suck up the oxygen. Who else? Who else? Either in response to what Britton said or something else.
I noticed that same thing. That kind of stood out to me. I think I'm always a little trying to be aware of how clients phrase things.
Hmm.
And that often when clients are phrasing that, maybe they've been compliant. They
Hmm.
did it. They may even have some good feelings, but they did it in a compliant state, and therefore they experienced it as me pulling it out of them instead of them choosing
Hmm.
it. And then, I'm always wondering if it's a little bit or it could be projective.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
you know, so I
Hmm.
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I've had clients say similar things but that's what they appreciate is that you're dead serious about really helping them get in touch with themselves, like at a deeper level, right? And so, like in some sense, I am trained to quote unquote pull it out, you know? I mean, I don't literally pull it out, and if they gave me a clear no, I would do my best to listen to that, and I do that. But but yeah, I don't know. It's a
Hmm.
tricky thing.
Yeah, the juice is not always worth the squeeze. Sometimes people can have breakthroughs and unlockings, but there's just too much compliance mixed in that the whatever therapeutic benefits are there, they tend to be minimal and they don't tend to generalize into the patient's life. So this
I,
is an important topic.
I think when I was reading it, I was just assuming that, it's hard when you're reading a transcript. You don't get to see the tone and the affect and all that's going with it. He doesn't go, and there was a sigh.
Mm,
And so I think I was just assuming that there's something that you can't, that there was something there that tells them it's not compliance or that,
mhm, mhm,
yeah.
mhm. Yeah, nonverbals. I think there may have been one place or two places in the transcript where there was commentary that the patient took a sigh or something like that. But I agree, there's so many nonverbals that we're not privy to for sure. Stephen and then Harrison. Stephen, you're up.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, my apologies. I just wanted to follow up on what Britton said and what Ruth said because, the piece about pulling it out, the image that just, I don't know why this happens, but all of a sudden I get these images that come into my mind. I was just thinking immediately of the thorn and Androcles and the lion.
Mm,
I hope that most people are familiar with this story, about Androcles, that he met this lion in the wild somewhere, and he was going to be slaughtered. I think it was in the Roman amphitheater with the Christians and the lions, and the lion decided not to attack him. I think if that the story is correct, either that or he was thrown into the hole with the lion, and the lion decided to do nothing. Partly because, gee, it feels so good when you pull that thorn out of my foot, right? So that's the image that came to my mind. I mean, the person might fight you like a lion,
Mm,
right? About wanting you to maybe confront them with what's going on and how their defenses are getting in the way of them being healthier. But
mm,
then they feel so grateful afterwards when you have, in fact, pulled the thorn out, which
mm,
is actually, some kind of a defense that they're not looking at something.
mhm. I think that's quite apt. Thank you,
And
Stephen.
that came just because of what Britton and Ruth were saying. So thank you very much, guys. This is a wonderful metaphor. I will be using it in the future.
Mm, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Stephen, Harrison.
Yeah. What I personally appreciated a lot about this case was, compared to some other cases, I really feel like we got a lot more meat of what happens after the unconscious is unlocked, so to speak. Whereas a lot of in some of the other transcripts, I feel like we kind of get the unlocking and then it's kind of over at that point, but we see so much of unfolding of um, I don't remember a lot of dream interpretation happening in other transcripts and how everything clicks in so nicely here, where I feel like that's kind of what we expect to see if it wasn't just compliance and people were just going with what you were wanting, but um, not that we had like a very clear idea like of what it is and we want to pull it out, but we just unlock the door and see what emerges and being open to that. I feel like I really got a lot of that sense in this case.
Mm,
So I think if we just get the fruit of what we would expect to see once the unconscious is unlocked, like in this case, I think that gives us a lot of confidence that it wasn't just compliance at play.
mhm, mhm. Well put.
Harrison, thank you. I get very little training in phase 6 or 7, which one is the working with after the unlocking, working with the person's history, and then the other one is working with the transference. And so what we saw here was really like a phase 6 or 7 from a psychoanalytic point of view. And it's not like Davanloo threw away all his tools. He just created these first 5 processes before he starts to interpret and pull for dreams and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm,
So,
mhm. Well put, Anne. Well put. Yair.
Yeah, I was also thinking about these issues of compliance, and
Mhm,
I do even also when I read, I noticed how Davanloo is really a lot of time he leads the session. Let's now and now he decides to move and invites the patient to talk about this issue. Then let's talk about this issue. So in order for the patient to cooperate, there must be some element of compliance, unless the patient will be really honest and will say, hey, now I don't like that you are leaning this. Now let's see, and then look at my feelings, how I don't like what you're doing. So in a way, the compliance, I mean, the defensive part of the compliance do cover some genuine elements in the patient's emotional being, as like, I don't really like what you're doing right now, but okay, I'll act as if I'm okay with it and I'll go with you.
mhm,
So there is some element, but I think it's a necessary element in order for the process to go through. And I think what also I assume that that's also what Davan has in mind in, like, maybe regarding this issue, that even at the end of the session, and I think that that's what we all hold, that even if we uncovered some important stuff, that's not the end of therapy. That's not mean we covered everything there is. We uncover all the emotional truths. And even he says, do you think that if we'll work in this way, then we can continue the work and getting to like other deeper issues? So I think that W says, okay, maybe there is compliance, but I'm not uh, in a task to now uncover the whole entire truth of the of the person's emotional life. It's gonna come later in the therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to piggyback off of what you're saying, Yair, the the flip side or the more charitable interpretation of the transcript is that it can be a mistake to be overly perfectionistic about compliance. That,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, so the patient said you've forced me or you pulled it out of me or whatever, and that can simply represent that a small part of the patient felt that way, but overall he really was on board and they really were a team pulling in the same direction. So it can be a mistake to be like overly perfectionistic, that you can't have a shred of compliance. Sometimes, like you were saying, a little bit of compliance on board, but you have such a strong unconscious therapeutic alliance and overall a robust conscious alliance that it's fine. It's fine. So I think that's an important point of view. Thank you, Yair. Sophie.
Um, yeah, I think what I was thinking was kind of it relates to some of what has been said. And when I read this article, and something that I've thought a lot about when reading the other articles that we've had, is that this idea that keeps on coming back to me is that I want to use the word elegant to describe the way that Davanloo like acts and reacts and the way he is and relates. And I was trying to think, what is it exactly that he does or doesn't do that makes it seem, at least when I read it, so elegant?
Hmm.
Um, and a few things that or one thing that stood out to me was the way, especially in the first part before the unlocking, the way that he manages to navigate the resistance without getting stuck in it. So, like, for example, him and the patient will be talking about something, and at some point, some resistance comes up, and Davanloo, like, just it seems, at least, just with a simple few remarks, he points it out, like in the transference, and then he makes a comment as to how that resistance is similar to another relationship that they've discussed.
Mhm.
And then the patient, see, it seems that the patient, like just with one sentence or two, he will like acknowledge it or confirm it or be like, yes, I see it. And then Davenlu immediately changes the focus and he's like, oh yeah, but so like back to your mom or back to your dad. And he's just like, it seems like he moves so lightly because I mean, another option would be that he would like more sit with it and be like, okay, yes, so what are the consequences of that? Or like encourage the patient to do something else or like something that we may see in his later work. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I really appreciate that, Sophie. And I think, Sophie, I think you're saying, tell me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be saying what I just said, that there's a lack of perfectionism. He's not like trying to dismantle the entire resistance, but he just wants movement. He wants to dismantle the resistance or get enough affect to just keep things moving. But he doesn't need
Yes, I
out of the unconscious. He just wants movement. That's my view of it.
and the process feels like there's so much space to like breathe and to move. It feels very like I don't feel tense at all when I read it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. So, yeah, Rachel and then Robert.
I'm thinking about Harrison, your comment, and like I feel like this is kind of a concrete point, but it clicked for me with your comment and also Johannes, your point about there not being an unlocking. Um, that like the emphasis on the TCP link was really helpful for me because I think before I sort of had that in my mind as like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, you're supposed to sort of track both triangles, but I would sort of forget to do that because I was focused on like trying to move towards an unlocking. And now I'm like, oh, right, that's really backwards. And unlocking is just potentially a tool to get there. But really, that TCP link, getting it in an experiential way is like really critical here. Um, Again, concrete, but that's just helpful for me to like really try to get that into my brain more.
Mhm. Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate that. Robert, I think I saw the thought bubble.
Oh, yeah, is that what happens? I only thought about doing it Um, a couple of comments. One is actually, I do agree that he doesn't dwell on the resistance a lot in some places, but in other transcripts, he dwells right there and he holds the foot to the fire, you know. He obviously is working some dynamic that he's experiencing. But I'd like to comment on the UTA for me. For me, I never had a psychoanalytic background, and I heard you say straight up and that you have a psychoanalytic background. And I just thought, oh my God, how did you get that? Because I never had a taste of that. So it was always starting from behind for me. And when I read that the resistance and the UTA track each other going up, so to speak, in high resistance clients, I thought, I can understand resistance, but I couldn't understand UTA. I'm thinking this is a mythical creature or creation that's been developed, you know, and I know it's kind of lurking in the background. And now and several of you are referring to it. We all have this experience, or we wouldn't be here, I think. But that it shows itself up by the desire, by the intensity of the clients wanting you, wanting me, wanting us to push them to do better, to show themselves. It shows up. I do say horrible things to my clients that you wouldn't say socially, and they say, "Yeah, yeah, please, please. I don't like it, but please." And I think this is the UTA. I think, you know, I now got it. It's not a mythical creation. It's a direct experience. They're wanting me and they're wanting us to find them. And it's a palpable experience. So, yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Really enjoyed that comment.
Lovely.
Bo.
Hey, Johannes. So I guess I got two questions. They're obvious questions, but I'm just trying to take them to a deeper level. First one is when you have a compliant patient,
Mhm.
does anybody have any other indicators of a compliant patient other than they're just, yes, 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 yes? Is there ever kind of a feeling like a nonverbal or transferential experience that you have with that person, something you feel off of them kind of in some way that tells you that they're being compliant, even though they might not be saying the hallmark, presentation of being compliant, like, yes, sir, and oh, yes, how can I do that? Or can I do that for, this kind of stuff? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is when you're looking for will, particularly when you have a compliant patient or a defiant patient or one that's resistant, they're kind of the opposite of the typical patient that's, there and yes, and they're engaged and they're leaning forward and their muscles are, kind of showing as if their will is just totally online. They're eager to learn. They're in there, they're not that kind of superficial compliance in some way. you know, how do you get the will online more with the compliant patient? How do you get the will more online with the resistant patient, other than what maybe some of what Davanloo showed in this particular vignette, right? Of kind of working through the resistance. Like, how do you know? What are the indicators that it's more kind of online? So I
Hmm.
know that was kind of a mouthful, but
Hmm. No, that's a lovely, lovely set of questions. Thank you for that. Um, yeah, who wants to take a stab at that before we get to Ruth? I know you have your hand up too. Unless Ruth, did you want to respond to what Bo said, Ruth?
Yeah, I can't answer the second part very well, maybe. I'll let you do that or someone else. But the first part, in terms of compliance, what's it look like? What I notice with clients is they might come in with a problem and they're looking for me. They're like expectant for me to give the answer. There's a lot of you're the expert, and
Mhm.
there seems to be a lot of um
like, do
yeah,
they say that to you,
desire
Ruth?
for
Like, do they say that out loud that you're the expert?
sometimes
Like, I
sometimes
know when I've got a patient that's sexually attracted to me, kind of in some way, they're going to give you a little bit of that googly eyes. They're going to make
Mhm.
certain kind of nonverbal kind of stuff, but it may not always be what they're saying. So that's why I was just kind
Yeah.
of
No,
asking.
I notice an expectant look or a passivity. They're gonna expect you to fill in the gaps or hope that you fill in the gaps.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, those are, they're just expectant that or they'll come in and they'll say it and then they go passive and they're not as participative or collaborative as you'd hope. Yeah.
Yeah, well
Do you get
put.
a sense of them being anxious when we're not meeting that will, that projection of will, or those kinds of things? Because I do notice that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like they feel a need to
Or
be able to like fill the room with words, right? It's almost like a nonverbal sometimes, like they're trying to figure out a way to kind of, you know,
yeah, I can sense that there's anxiety there or some frustration if I'm not filling in the gaps or somehow telling them the answer or get, a lot, or there might be like a lot of, I don't know how to do it. Like, you have to show me how to do it.
Mhm.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I concur. I've had those experiences too, Ruth. I also notice sometimes just a felt sense that the patient they're sort of there but not there. Like they're not fully present. They're not really behind what they're saying. There isn't that charge or juice behind what they're saying. There's a quality of going through the empty motions, sort of being there but not quite there.
do you feel that kind of almost like that draw, like that superficial zeal that's coming off of them, Johannes? Like it's just it's what's the expression? Uh they're saying the words, but they're not
Music
like
isn't there.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. If they're leaning performative, there might be performative element of sort of trying to demonstrate that they're enthusiastic, but it has a hollow ring to it. So you develop a feel for it, your spidey senses will learn how to pick up on that eventually. And then the obvious thing is you typically you won't see signaling, you won't see spontaneous deep sighs because the compliance is so effectively managing the anxiety. So you won't see those kind of signals.
Or they rush fast to the other side where they start to get pissed with you because you're not filling that hole for them in some way. You're not the all-knowing, you
Mhm.
know, therapist, right? That's going to give them, the things that they feel like you should give them in some way, right? They're just, you need to give me the answer. You need to give me the answer, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Stephen and Ann.
Okay. Sorry, can I be
Good.
heard? Okay, all right, fair enough. I wasn't sure if I was muted or unmuted. I just want to follow up on what Ruth said because I think, there is a lot of this sometimes that happens with me. And I will just ask the client directly. If I start to see a lot of this in the
Mm.
client, if I'm saying something, they say, oh, yes, I'm wondering if this might be the case. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. It's like, I say to them directly, I'll confront them, I'll say, so are you saying yes because you really mean it, or are you just trying to please the therapist now? And I'll talk about myself as the therapist now. Is that what you're trying to do? Because I want to make sure that they're actually, if I make a suggestion, I say, I wonder if this is what might be going on for you. Is that true or is it not true? Or you're just wanting to say yes to me to make me happy? Because
Mhm.
I'm not interested in that.
Mhm. Mhm. That's good. That's good. Ann, you're up.
Yeah, I'm responding back to both Sophie and Robert, and Sophie, what you said about the elegance, of course, and then Robert, what you said about psychoanalytic background. Um, uh, given Davanloo's a genius, and given that he spent 20 to 30 years day and night looking at videotapes, okay, but also I think that his psychoanalytic background is so foundational. It gives him all kinds of insight before anybody who hasn't had that background is able to reach it. And I spent 40 years studying the psychoanalytic literature. And one of the years was 1 year with five people and two scholars, two Freudian scholars, reading through his major papers. It's the most exciting academic year of my life. And I feel sorry that we don't have a course like that. Nobody's reading Freud. I mean, it's good enough if they read Davanloo. And that's heinous if nobody's reading Davanloo. And so I feel, but here's the flip side of that. I feel very fortunate to have this background. At the same time, I'm very old and I don't have that much longer to go, and I'll never master ISTDP because I spent all my earlier years studying psychoanalytic theory. And
Hmm.
there's no, I mean, it's very important to know Freud and Klein and Winnicott. You just have to know them to have a, but and I think that that gives Sophie, I think that gives a lot of the elegance to him. He can see so far in advance with all those three things: his genius, his 30 years of tapes, videotapes, and then this incredible. I mean, Sigmund Freud is thrilling if you get to read him. And I always say the interpretation of dreams is his dream book. I think he edited it more than any other piece of work. And not the beginning of it. Don't do his review of the literature and, but go to the chapters on condensation and displacement. There, Lacan has said Freud's greatest contribution is his understanding of the grammar of the unconscious. Now, you see, if you really have the grammar of the unconscious according to Freud, then Sophie, you can look real elegant because you can bounce farther around. Anyway,
Hmm.
uh, enough said about that.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you, Ann. That's quite an endorsement. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Harrison.
I was just gonna echo what you said, Johannes, in regards to Bo's comment. Just overall, I feel like the thing that helps me the most clock in is using my countertransference in those moments where it either rings hollow or sometimes it almost I sometimes get these mental imageries of like I'm leading them on a leash and kind of they're going along with me. The same way sometimes it really does feel metaphorically like a tug of war when you got a really resistant patient. I have to remind myself to drop the rope and get out of the enactment. So just listening to my body and the countertransference has been the most helpful for me.
Mhm. Or
So
if,
Harrison,
oh,
so Harrison, it's like you're able to see through the lip service. That's the word I was trying to come up with earlier. Like they're just, they're talking, but you can feel that in your transference, that disconnect, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
feel like it feels like lip service, like what we feel like when we know someone's kind of bullshitting
Absolutely.
us a little bit, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Okay.
Bo, they never disagree. They just say everything that any therapist would want to hear. At a certain point, that becomes suspect in and of itself.
Right.
So let's see. Ruth, is that you?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and they don't seem to take any time if you ask them a question, they answer it quickly. It's just a yes that's immediate versus a thoughtful process. Yeah.
Good, good. Should we get to concerns?
I, I'd like to piggyback on
Oh,
this comment, if I could, please. Harrison, I agree. And the thing that sticks out for me is that I start to feel like I'm a good therapist. And that's got to ring warning lights.
Great.
yeah. Good, 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 good. I want to make sure we also make room for concerns and disagreements. We're not here to worship Davanloo, really. So I know that some of you had reactions to inviting the patient to describe the wife's physicality and her appearance. I welcome criticisms too, disagreements with Davanloo. Does anybody wish to share? Britton.
So, yeah, I've never had the thought as a therapist in the past 5 years to ask a patient what their significant other looks like naked. Um, but Davenloo obviously did have that thought, and so then the question is like, why do I feel like even after reading Davenloo that I would never ask any patient what their significant other looked like naked? And the conclusion I came to was that I just live in a different time, a different culture. Like I think about things differently. My patients think about things differently. Like, um,
In Victorian times.
but but Davenloo obviously like because he uses the word intimate a lot, right? And he's inviting this intimacy
Mhm.
that is the most intimate. And it clearly stirs up the resistance and the feelings and yada yada. So, but yeah, just it's like on the face of it, it's like what am I reading right now? But then I have to kind of
Mhm.
reflection with it. So,
Yeah, given that time period, like that may have
mhm.
made sense, but it just may not actually be a good intervention for a lot of us in this time period.
Right. Yeah. Because, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh, thank you for that. I think that's a really keen observation. What do people think about that? Leslie.
Well, if I was a male therapist and I had any patient, but female or male, and I asked them that question out of the blue without them bringing up physicality first, and someone complained about it, I would expect to get fired, and that would be okay. Like that's just the world we live in now. And so, the main concern I had with that is it just seemed like coming in nowhere.
Mhm.
Like he did, I know he clips a lot of the article. He kind of jumps around a bit.
Mhm.
And it also like I just didn't see it going anywhere other than getting him more activated.
Mhm.
But and I did, yeah, I know he did describe his wife a little more, but
Mhm.
I just don't see the the reason that was necessary. Like really. Like and there's a couple other times when he does that, he takes a bit of a leap. And it feels like it's a bit of leap of faith
Mhm.
with some of the questions. And again, I like I'm in like maybe this is a great perspective because I'm a new counselor and I don't have any psychoanalytic training. So maybe this is, this is general counseling versus ISTDP versus Freudian stuff, right? Like this is the gaps
Mhm.
between these different schools that I am like that I'm witnessing and I am wrestling with because a couple of the things that I learn and I'm trained to do is to only ask open-ended questions, to
Mhm.
not put words in people's mouths, and
Mhm.
to not go anywhere that's obvious that they're not already going.
Mhm.
And so Davanloo he doesn't follow those rules.
True.
Um, and
That's
I know that like making the interpretations in general, just making some of those interpretations,
Mhm.
um, it feels presumptuous.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's good reason because it seems like it really works and they really hone in.
Mhm.
But he doesn't let the patient make the interpretation,
Mhm.
right? He gives it to him.
Mhm.
And so that I always have a little bit of a resistance to. Like, why don't you let them come to the conclusion
Mhm.
instead of kind of giving them the conclusion? Anyway, any
Mhm.
thoughts from other people would be great.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, he will sometimes lead the witness. It's true. He sometimes does that. Thank you so much, Leslie. Let's see. Ruth and then, well, actually, Rachel then Ruth.
So yeah, I also had a strong negative reaction to this part. I and I'm not convinced that it's a gender thing or that it's about the timing. Like I think I don't actually think it's an intimate question. I mean it's a personal question. It's probing, but I don't think like, so the patient had said he enjoys, I assume he's saying he's affectionate with his wife. It's enjoyable. However, I'm not satisfied still. So I think it makes sense for Davanloo if he's trying to be intimate with the patient to say something like, "Tell me more about what happens." Like really get into what happens, what actually excites you. Like be specific, and then what happens that it's not satisfying. That would potentially elicit resistance, but would be like intimate. I think the question he's asking is like a very it's reducing the relationship down, he's assuming, which it doesn't really seem like it fits with his understanding of relationships and like, so I think it's really in contrast to what seems like his efforts at genuine complete intimacy to just be like, oh well, it must there I'm assuming there's something about the physicality that would have the answer for us. I mean, maybe that's not generous of me to assume that's where he's going. um so anyway, I think then when the like what is alarming to me is that then the sort of framing of that, I think it's kind of there's a potential for gaslighting to say, well, I'm just trying to get close to you, so why are you resisting me? And then his framing, Davenlow's framing to us of like, oh, this is a question that very often arouses intense resistance, like that he's using it tactically. Like all of that kind of just gives me the heebie-jeebies, and seems problematic and like a blind spot or something.
Well, that makes sense to me. Thank you so much, Rachel. Um, Ruth and then Stephen.
Rachel said a lot of what I was going to say. I noticed that he intentionally is trying to provoke the client, which I know he does. I would never ask a client anything like this, male or female, unless they brought it up and we were in the conversation. I would never bring it up. Feels a little, sometimes these types of things where you're going into, you're intentionally, or he's intentionally provoking the client in certain areas that are personal. I also agree it's not intimate. I wouldn't interpret it as an intimate space. But it feels a bit manipulative emotionally. Um, so, and Leslie, I'll agree with some of your, I'm also not psychoanalytically trained, even though I've done a decent amount of reading, but that's not the same as training. That I can have some, I'm not sure how much I agree with the leading or the putting the words in the mouth type, like where he tells them the answer. I do find in my practice that I tend to prefer, but I also tend to think that we get deeper when the client can find it and see it and name it. Yeah.
Well, I really value this. Thank you so much, guys. Good. I'm glad people aren't just swallowing everything, but thinking critically. And my hope for everybody is that you take what you like and you discard the rest. So this is wonderful, wonderful, good attitude. Stephen.
Okay, so yeah, I was kind of a little bit shocked, to be honest with you. And just to follow up on what Leslie said, it's like, wow, if you said that, and if you happen to be a male therapist, and it happened to be another client, regardless of their gender, and you were asking those kind of questions, I would guess if you're working in a public capacity, that yeah, you pretty much could be fired virtually right away. It is part of our jobs to investigate and to probe, but I think also I wonder in some capacity, because later on in the article, page 74, that's when I went bing, all of a sudden I can see maybe what he's trying to do, that he's trying to encourage the client in some capacity to undress psychologically, to take off his or her armor and say, well, can we know a little bit more? But it was maybe done perhaps in a bit of a clumsy way, right? He says, and then a while ago, I was focusing on this is page 70. I was focusing on your intimate thoughts, which has to do with exposing, which in a sense was like your father telling you to pull down your pants and you resisted. Like your father, am I demanding that you expose yourself? Do you see a similarity there? And so I would just be curious, like, what's your motivation for asking this question, Mr. Davanloo, right?
Was it that question or the one about his wife?
The question about his wife. What's your motivation for asking this question? Do you think that he's trying to resist you and he doesn't want to try to, psychologically undress for fear of his own shame about his relationship with his wife? I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea what his motivation for that might have been, but I could see how, if it was done in a very clumsy fashion, it could be quite not just offensive, but it could raise the anger within the client towards Davanloo. Not that the question isn't valid, not that the question isn't worth pursuing. For sure it is, but like some of the other people here who have said today, you have to invite the client. Can we look at this? Would it be okay if we looked at such and such? To invite them, and then if they're okay volunteering the information, then you can go further with that. Say, oh, okay, so maybe this is why you have a struggle with your wife. It's the same struggle that you might have with your father, same struggle that you might have with me, etc., etc.
This all makes
But
sense.
it is kind of it's kind of a charged question.
Yeah, for sure. This is a great conversation. Robert, you're up.
It certainly generates energy in our group, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This is obviously a loaded topic, an anxious topic, especially for us, even as therapists. But sexuality is a huge part of relationships. When we look at people, we see their gender, we see their sexuality just emanating, and we're evaluating all the time, this or that, and we try not to make it foreground too much, I hope. But I think he's, well, if you're doing an inquiry with a client, you're going to be asking about their sexual experiences and their relationship with their partner. And you know this is going to generate anxiety. There's no question about that. But I think he's also hedging towards the Oedipal complex all the way through here. In other cases, he's spoken about, um, did you notice your mum? Did, and it comes out, the client is very reticent to say, yeah, I did look and I did see, and very reticent to describe what he saw or she saw. Maybe about her dad, but I don't know. But this leads directly into the Oedipal triangle that's going on, and how it goes with you, how it goes with the partner of this patient, but also back to their childhood. I think it's another valid way to get into the inquiry. How bold are we to do that, and how subtle are we to do that? That's on us. But really, it's an important line of inquiry, which is kind of taboo in regular counseling.
I'm really
I do,
enjoying,
Bob.
really enjoying these comments, everybody. Harrison, I think it's you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm in both camps here where I agree with Steve saying maybe it was done in a clumsy way, so to speak, by Davanloo here. But I kind of have this reaction whenever he talks, and it always is with male patients and asking them to describe their wives' bodies or mothers' bodies, or at least that's the example so far in transcripts we read. Every time he does it, I bristle twin. I'm like, ooh, like that. Ugh, I don't like that.
Mhm.
But then as the transcript goes on, I can't help but kind of get why he went there. The other case, it was the difference between women with big breasts versus small breasts and how that tied into the Oedipal complex at that point too. And here, with Steve, you made the connection here I saw as well about the whole idea of undressing, right? Undressing the patient, undressing the wife, and the father undressing him. And so as the transcript goes on, I still don't like it when it happened, but then I go like, oh, okay, fine. Like I get why he did it. I kind of have that reaction. Um, but I don't deny that the current cultural climate we live in, yeah, this is like a very risky intervention to do. I completely concur, but I almost kind of hate to see that, it's like, okay, fine, I get why he did it here, kind of a reaction I have.
No, thanks, Harrison. There's one case where the patient is female, the case of the so-called fragile patient. He gets into details about her sexual life. So maybe I'll assign that reading for the next time. Anne.
Yeah. Oh my, I just wanted to respond to what you were saying, Harrison. And as you, even if he jolts you, as you go on and you see how effective it is, you have to ask yourself what, and remember, one of the things that struck me the most about Freud was how courageous he was. He was in the Victorian era. We're not in the Victorian era. We've been through the 60s. We and it's not nearly as dangerous now as it was when he was writing about it and childhood sexuality and all that. So, but the other thing I wanted to say was I think we have to remember that Davenport wrote this chapter in 1987. Now he started in 1960 to work, but he wrote it in 1987. And I think he was possibly trying to bridge the gap between the Freudian model and where he was going with his creative ability. And and I happen to not think that Davanloo is provocative, because I think what we're facing is a cultural change, is a cultural issue. Learning a second language, learning ISTDP is a cultural event. And we need to catch up with Davanloo's culture in a way. Not that he's perfect, goodness sakes, he was a very disturbed man. But he had some kind of a genius contact with the unconscious of another, and he could follow it. And he was not shy in addressing it immediately, directly. And so
Yeah,
maybe,
that's good.
yeah.
I'm undecided myself. I am not quite sure where I am. There's something about the intervention that strikes me as clunky, like he's throwing a technique at the patient as opposed to letting it emerge more organically from the content. So in that sense, I agree with Rachel, but I am undecided. That's where I'm at. Bo, I think you'll have the last word.
Just kind of digesting everything everybody said. I'm not in any way defending Davanloo, but the one thing I do try to kind of think about is what someone said earlier about these clips that kind of come in, right? It's kind of choppy with the dialogues and the scripts.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the things I think about, kind of like what Ann talked about, I didn't have as much of a rich background and training like Ann did, but what I do remember from my psychodynamic training was the fusion of aggressive and sexual impulses, right? And the way that we relate to other people and the way we relate to ourselves. And so he's dealing with a psychoneurotic, patient here that's got some resistance and fragility there. And often when we have psychoneurotic individuals, they're often cut off, and that a lot of that ways of relating to themselves and relating to others, and often there can be a lot of timidity, right? Like I'm hesitant about expressing myself. I put this wall up kind of in some way. And so if I have to imagine kind of the motivation behind that, and you kind of see that a little bit later in the script kind of thing, is he's trying to tease that process out. I don't know that I would have gone about that until maybe I developed a little bit more relationship with them. And like some of the other folks said, it led to that. And then we said, oh, here's an opportunity. Here's another window. Let's go into the sexual side for them kind of in some way. But again, I don't have any context. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't a fly on the wall kind of thing. So I had a strong reaction again when I first saw that too, like a lot of people. Then I said, well, let me back up from that a little bit. Let me backtrack that initial kind of reaction. So that's all I
Brilliant.
got.
Brilliant. I have to jump, but Leslie, you just shared a Zoom link to your Zoom account. So if people want to hang out, please feel free to do that. Uh, I'm
What do
going.
we do? We just go back to our email and just get her link?
No, right here in the chat, Leslie has shared her Zoom information. So
Oh,
what you
oh,
do is
oh.
you click on that link. I'm going to turn off my camera and use the bathroom. So I'm not going to immediately end this meeting. So in about 2 minutes or so, the meeting will end. But you have about 2 minutes to look at the chat function here and click on the link that Leslie shared if you want to keep hanging out. But I have to go myself, but it's been wonderful. Thank you guys, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Johannes,
Yeah.
and all.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Johanna.
Thank you. Yeah, you bet.